हाँ, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद अंजलि। थैंक यू अंजलि। तो एक्चुअली शुरू में कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में ये लिखा है कि चुनाव आयोग का चयन प्रेसिडेंट के थ्रू होगा जब तक कि पार्लियामेंट कोई इस पर कानून ना बना दे। जब इस पर कंस्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली में डिस्कशन हुआ, डिबेट हुआ, तो उस समय कई लोगों ने ये बोला था कि चुनाव आयोग सरकार से स्वतंत्र होना चाहिए और इसलिए सबने उम्मीद जताई थी कि जो कानून बनेगा उसमें चयन की प्रक्रिया भी सरकार से स्वतंत्र होगी। अब हुआ ये कि बहुत साल तक कानून नहीं बना और सेशन साहब के आने के बाद कई साल तक चुनाव आयोग सरकार से स्वतंत्र रूप में काम करता रहा। लेकिन पिछले 8-10 साल से ये देखा जा रहा था कि चुनाव आयोग की स्वतंत्रता खत्म हो गई थी और ऐसे ऐसे लोगों को वहां नियुक्त किया जा रहा था जो बिल्कुल सरकार के पिट्ठू थे। एक साहब तो ऐसे आ गए जिनके जो एयर इंडिया के चीफ भी थे उससे पहले, और जिनके बारे में रेडियो टेप्स में एक कॉन्वर्सेशन है जो ये दिखाता है कि वो कह रहे हैं कि न्यायपालिका में बड़ा भ्रष्टाचार है। चीफ जस्टिस पंजाब एंड हरियाणा के एक केस में जजमेंट देने के लिए 9 करोड़ रुपए उन्होंने लिया। वो आदमी मेरे पास आया था, उसने मुझे दिखाया वो जो फैसला उनको उसको कल मिलने वाला है। तो यानी कि ऐसे ऐसे लोगों को अपॉइंट कर दिया गया जिनको पूरी जानकारी होने के बाद भी कि भाई भ्रष्टाचार से कोई फैसला कोर्ट का कराया गया है, उन्होंने उस पर कुछ नहीं किया। तो जब हम लोगों ने कई पिटिशंस फाइल करी सुप्रीम कोर्ट में कि भाई जिस तरह से सीबीआई के डायरेक्टर की नियुक्ति पर पहले सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने बोला और फिर कानून बना कि उसकी नियुक्ति एक 3 मेंबर कमेटी करेगी जिसमें प्रधानमंत्री, लीडर ऑफ ऑपोजिशन और चीफ जस्टिस होंगे। इस तरह के रिकमेंडेशन कम से कम 5 अलग अलग कमेटियां कर चुकी हैं, जिसमें लॉ कमीशन भी था और भी कई सरकारी कमेटी थी, क्योंकि ये मामला कई कम से कम 30 साल से 40 साल से अलग अलग कमेटियों के पास गया और उन्होंने सबने रेकमेंड किया कि भाई इस तरह का कानून बनना चाहिए कि एक स्वतंत्र चयन समिति हो। और ज्यादातर लोगों ने इसी तरह की कमेटी बोली कि भाई प्रधानमंत्री हो, लीडर ऑफ ऑपोजिशन हो और चीफ जस्टिस हो उसमें। तो जब ये मामला सुप्रीम कोर्ट में कुछ साल पहले हम लोगों ने फाइल किया और उस पर एक संविधान खंडपीठ बनाई गई, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बेंच, they heard the matter and finally the judgment that they gave was to the effect that the independence of the election commission comes not merely from the fact that they are functionally independent in the sense that the government cannot remove them except by a process of impeachment like that of for removal of High Court and Supreme Court judges. But its independence also comes from the selection. And they said very clearly that this principle, that selection is equally important to secure the independence of any body, was laid down in the Judicial Appointment Commission's case, where a 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court held that the Judicial Appointment Commission's Act, which was a constitutional amendment, was unconstitutional. It violated the basic structure of the Constitution because the government still had substantial scope for interfering with the selection of judges. So therefore, they said that the selection of judges has to be completely independent of the government in order to secure the independence of the judiciary. In the Election Commission case, they reiterated the same principle. And in fact, they had a very live example before them, because during the hearing of this case, when I pointed out that one post of the election commissioner is still vacant And that should also be that we have an interim application where we are praying that that selection should also be made by an independent committee. At the very before the next hearing, which was just 4 days later, the government moved very quickly to fill up that post and appoint an election commissioner completely arbitrarily. The name of 3 people were plucked out from nowhere without any basis, completely arbitrarily by the law minister. Same day, the Prime Minister approved the appointment of this one gentleman called Arun Goel, and same day he was given premature retirement from the Punjab cadre, where he was a serving IAS officer, in order to facilitate his appointment, and the government presented the court with a fait accompli. The court had the occasion to look into this very carefully, examine the file, and also came to the conclusion that this was done in a very arbitrary manner in order to preempt the court's judgment. Now, so the court said that in order to secure the independence of the election commission, the appointment must also be by an independent committee. And they said that since several committees have already recommended a selection committee of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, and Chief Justice, they passed an order that till such time that a law is made by Parliament, this committee will select the election commissioners. Now, it was expected that the law which would be made by Parliament would be in tune with this Constitution bench judgment of the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the new bill which has come, as Anjali has pointed out, changes the composition of the selection committee. The Chief Justice has been removed and replaced by a cabinet minister appointed by the Prime Minister. Therefore, you have Prime Minister, another cabinet minister appointed by him, and Leader of Opposition. So Leader of Opposition is in a minority, and essentially the government can still select whoever they want as election commissioner. And we have seen that wherever there are these kind of committees where the government dominates the selection process, they override the objections of the Leader of Opposition, which we have seen in the appointments of information commissioners also. So again, through this act, and we assume that it will be passed in the Lok Sabha also in this session, because the government has a majority in the Lok Sabha, and in any case, no discussion is virtually permitted in Parliament these days. And laws and bills, sometimes as many as 10 bills are passed in 5 minutes amidst a lot of din and shouting, without any real voting or counting of votes also. So we assume that this will be passed. But in my view, this law will be unconstitutional because it goes against the basis on which the Supreme Court has said that we need an independent selection committee for election commissioners. Because the court said that in order to ensure the functioning of democracy, we need an independent election commission, which has complete control over the conduct of elections. And in order to ensure an independent election commission, we need to secure its appointments by an independent selection committee, and it should not be controlled by the government, in which case it will not be an independent election commission, and thereby it will jeopardize the functioning of our democracy. So in my view, this law will be unconstitutional. It can be challenged on the ground that it violates democracy, which is a basic feature of the Constitution. And in my view, it should be struck down by the Supreme Court. We have had such precedents earlier also, where the Supreme Court had earlier held in the judgment of the Association for Democratic Reforms that in order to ensure proper democracy, the voters have a right to know the criminal antecedents and assets and liabilities of candidates. Now, in order to overcome that judgment, the government brought a bill to nullify this, saying that no such declaration has to be made by candidates, which the Supreme Court had directed, that every candidate has to declare on affidavit his criminal antecedents, educational qualifications, and his assets and liabilities. Now, that law, which was brought to nullify this judgment, was challenged immediately by the PUCL in another petition, and fortunately the Supreme Court struck down that law on the same ground that, look, we had given the earlier directions in order to secure democracy, in order to secure the right of information, right to information of voters, which is part of Article 19(1)(a), that is fundamental right to free speech also. So therefore, on that basis, they struck down this law, and I believe and I hope that the Supreme Court will also strike down this law on the same ground that this kind of selection committee controlled by the government will violate the free election commission, which is free of government influence and control, and will thereby also violate democracy. So just one more thing I wanted to say. On this one nation, one election, I just want to use this opportunity to just point out why one nation, one election, which is very much in the news these days, is not possible in a parliamentary democracy. See, in a parliamentary democracy where the government's survival depends upon its commanding majority support in the assembly or in parliament, if the government collapses mid-term, then obviously you will, if you want to maintain democracy, you will have to have fresh elections mid-term. You cannot wait for the remaining term, which may be 2, 3, even 4 years, in order to and keep the state or even the center under president's rule. Of course, the center can't be kept under president's rule, and therefore this one nation, one election is only possible if you switch from a parliamentary democracy to a presidential form, like in the US. In the US, because the president is one person, he doesn't depend upon for survival on his getting majority support from the Congress or from the Senate, etc. Therefore, you can have, and if the president dies, the vice president becomes the president. If the vice president dies, the speaker becomes the president. Therefore, the survival of the government doesn't depend on the government having majority support in parliament, which can always change on account of splits or defections, etc. So therefore, one nation, one election is not possible unless you fundamentally change our system to a presidential system. And I don't think this government is capable of doing that. So I believe that the only reason why this kind of balloon has been floated is for them to try and postpone the assembly elections in these 5 states, which are coming up in November. And I believe that the government would probably want to pass a resolution in this session, special session of parliament, to the effect that because we have appointed a committee to look at one nation, one election, therefore, these assembly elections should be postponed to coincide with the general elections, which are coming up in April, May next year. So I just wanted to say this because this is something which is not very well understood by people. So thank you very much, Anjali. मैं हिंदी में इसको नहीं ट्रांसलेट करूंगा, आप कर दीजिएगा.